So thank you everybody for joining us today. Welcome to the first webinar in our Festival of Learning series as part of the Resilient Ontario Orchestras project. Katherine will tell you a little bit more about that project soon, but to introduce myself, I'm Lauren Drew. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm Director of Member Services and Learning for OC. I'm a white woman in my 20s with long brown hair and black glasses. Behind me is a white wall with a green and white Trent University degree and a poster of the ferry and bridge going over a river. I'm joining you today from Nogajiwanong, or Peterborough, Ontario. Nogajiwanong is located on Treaty 20 Mississauga territory and in the traditional territory of the Mississauga and Chippewa nations, collectively known as the Williams Treaty First Nations, which include Curve Lake, Hiawatha, Alderville, Scugog Island, Rama, Beausoleil, and Georgina Island First Nations. I am so grateful to live and work and play on this land ever since I was a kid. So with that, I will do a few tech notes before we get started. So Katherine, if you can go to the next slide there. So today's session, please keep your video and audio muted throughout. We are recording, but you do have access to the chat. We'll have a Q&A portion near the end. So if you can type your questions for speakers in the chat, we'll try to get to them in the last 10 minutes or so of the presentation. We're happy to offer English closed captioning from rev.com. So I'll paste instructions to enable that in the chat in just a second. And again, we're recording. We'll share that with you in the next couple of weeks. And we'll also share resources from this session, including the PowerPoint, with you afterward. So with that, I'll hand it over to Katherine and you'll see some stuff in the chat for me.
Great. So I want to start out by introducing myself. I am Katherine Carleton, Executive Director of Orchestras Canada, Orchestra Canada. Like Lauren, I come to you from Peterborough, Nogajiwanong, and I too take time each day to ponder what it is that means to be living and working on the traditional territories of the Mississauga and Anishinaabe people. I'm a 59-year-old white woman with shoulder-length gray hair. I have glasses, and there's rather a lot of books and art in the room behind me, which bring me great joy. Start out today by acknowledging the incredible support of the Ontario Trillium Foundation. The OTF has made the Resilient Ontario Orchestras project possible, and I have to say it's been a festival of learning for Orchestras Canada and for the orchestras who were able to participate. It's not just the money though, it's also the people and the energy. So I do want to acknowledge the 23 participating orchestras, 21 participating consultants, our steering committee, Maggie Goldsmith, Matthew Jones, Eileen Kuhn, Leanne Luton, Roy Takayesu, and Sandra Weeks, each one working with a smaller budget orchestra in Ontario and bringing a lot of richness to our exchange. Our lead consultant, Lucy White, and the team at OC, particularly Lauren Drew and Boren Saza. Specific thanks today to our special guests from the Etobicoke Philharmonic Orchestra, Judy Gargaro, not only president but also cellist with the orchestra, and Matthew Jones, music director and also cellist, but we'll just say Matthew Jones, music director, as well as consultant Sandy Lee, who worked with the EPO and wishes very much that she could have been here today. But we've had a good conversation and debriefed, and so I bring greetings from Sandy and also our gratitude back to her. Now then, agenda. I'll do a short presentation on mission, vision, and values, the what, why, who, when, and how. We'll then roll into a conversation with the folks from the Etobicoke Philharmonic, and then we'll have an opportunity for questions and answers. So, what is a mission? I've decided to quote from a bunch of people who I think have important things to say about what a mission is. Terrific book by James Fills, Integrating Mission and Strategy for Nonprofit Organizations. He talks about the mission as the fuel that provides psychological energy. He talks about the mission as the source of passion. And he talks about the role that the mission plays in defining social value and the social value created by the organization. Another plain language definition, it's a short description of what you are and what you want to be, and it answers the question, what is the purpose of the orchestra? This is a quote from a long ago guide to preparing a 3-year plan for orchestras published by the Ontario Arts Council. Third try, and this one comes from Jim Collins in his wonderful book, Good to Great. Mission defines the enduring characteristics of an organization. Its self-identity that remains consistent through time and transcends product market life cycles, technological breakthroughs, management fads, and individual leaders. It's the bonding glue that holds an organization together as it grows. So 3 thinkers and their thoughts on mission. Let's roll on to a poll. And Lauren, I'll ask you to bring a poll up. And my saucy question is to the people in the room, EPO, don't vote. If someone asked you to, could you summarize the key points of your organization's mission statement in a few words? Yes, no, or And really interested to see, Lauren, you'll have to report on the poll because I can't see it as a presenter. So feel free to let us know how we're doing if people are seeing the poll.
They are rolling in. We'll give it another 30 seconds or so.
And once you've voted, I'd ask participants to share in the chat if you were a yes or an what part of your orchestra's mission statement sticks with you. And we will be harvesting the chat and thinking about this deeply after today's presentation.
All right, I'm going to close the poll and show the results on the screen. So you can see that 71% of people said yes, 10% said no, and 19% said
Okay, you yeses and ums, start typing in the chat. I'm aching to hear what it is that sticks with you from that mission that you more or less recall. Great work, everyone. Thank you. Okay, rolling on. What is a vision? And in this particular case, I'm very much paraphrasing Jim Collins. A vision requires the entire organization to be involved. It's not invested in one person. It is a collective accomplishment, a perspective on collective accomplishment. It requires a long time to get done, 10 to 30 years. It's aspirational and not a sure bet. It absolutely requires thinking beyond current limitations and conditions. And it includes a vivid and engaging description of what it will be like when you get there. What are values? It seems self-evident, but I'll say it anyway. These are the essential beliefs that you will not compromise for short-term gain. These too are timeless. And what's more, they are inspiring and unifying. They help us find common cause with one another, and they bring out positive human traits. Now, I suppose if I wanted to be cynical, I could suggest that there could be negative values. There could be evil people framing value statements. We're not going to go down that road today. We're going to assume that if a group of people of goodwill and heart are talking together about their values, it's about good stuff. Okay. Let me ask second poll question, if that's okay, Lauren. Does your orchestra have a value statement? And again, we're offering 3 choices: yes, no, and not sure. Lauren, if you're okay to report on progress, that would be wonderful. And once you've voted, we'd love to know, what values do you think your orchestra lives by, whether they're written down or not? And this is for everyone once you've voted, whether you know you've got a value statement, whether you don't know, whether you're not sure.
The responses are rolling in. We'll give it another 20 seconds or so.
We need music.
I'll start humming. Okay, I will share the results. So we've got 59% saying yes, 27% saying no, and 14% saying not sure.
Okay, and again, I'll just ask people to start to think and start to type some of the values that they think their orchestra embodies, whether or not they're written down. And again, we'll be taking a look at this after the session today. So, why would you do this work? It's all just words, right? So this is where I go a little bit off script and I say some outrageous things. It is extremely possible in an organization that has a range of stakeholders who are coming at their work, coming at their engagement with the organization from some very different perspectives and some very different definitions of what success looks like. It's possible for that organization to evolve into a permanently failing organization. I'm going to read you a definition of what a permanently failing organization is. And this is taken from Marshall Meyer and Lynn Zucker's book called Permanently Failing Organizations, published back in 1989. The suggestion is that constituencies develop in and around organizations that are more interested in the organization's survival than they are in its performance. The interests of those constituencies, which could include workers, customers, and communities, coincide with the board of directors when the organizations are doing well, but in the face of declining performance, these constituents can often resist efforts to reallocate resources, do things differently, or at the most extreme degree, shut things down. So it's really about diverse perspectives on what success looks like, no real opportunity to bring people together in their perspectives of what success looks like. And no single body has enough power to be able to set a fresh direction. So you wind up with a group of people who are disaffected, who are disgruntled, the organization isn't serving them, but they can't, because they can't agree, it can perpetuate for many years, in fact, in a state of suboptimal performance. Why do this work? Avoid that fate. It also empowers members and stakeholders to speak their truth. It can help point everyone in the same direction. It can model transparency. It enables organizations to tell their stories better, and this comes up often in conversations with funders and donors. And it also creates conditions in which leaders can lead because everybody's basically pointed in the same direction, and it gives leaders the tools that they need in order to be able to proceed with a clear understanding that they are well supported. I'm really passionate about the content of this slide, but I'll move on. Who should be involved? It is really important, and all the literature lines up around this. This does need to be group work. We're accustomed to the idea of individual leading geniuses in our world. You know, the trope of the conductor on the podium leading us all gloriously forward, and yet orchestras are a collective act. Orchestras are a collective art form. This too needs to be group work. It should involve board members who are the ultimate authorities, needs representatives from the orchestra, needs the music director, can have representation from staff if you've got them, direct service volunteers if you've got them. It also needs people who know your history, people who know your community, people who have time and patience for group process and for working these things through. When might you get it done? When might you start it at least? At the beginning of a long-range planning process. And we'll hear a little bit from our friends in Etobicoke about where it fit in for them. When you're getting ready to apply for funding, these statements can be a key part of a case for support. When you're revising your bylaws or other governing documents, when you're considering community collaborations, and you need to clarify who you are before you hop into a relationship with someone fresh, or when you realize that you can't collectively agree on a way forward and you need to spend some time clarifying what that would be. How might you undertake it? You need time, commitment, leadership, and goodwill. Certainly nice to have an external facilitator with insights on our sector. You need some organizational history to keep you informed. And something else that I can't read at the bottom of my screen, but we'll just say that you can see it and I can't. So we'll roll on like that. My apologies. Okay, so I think with that, I'm going to stop the share and we're going to roll into the next part of our conversation, which is the EPO story starring Judy and Matthew. So Judy, can I ask you to unmute yourself and tell us who you are and where you are today?
So my name is Judy Gargaro. I'm the president of the Etobicoke Philharmonic Orchestra, or EPO, and I'm also a cellist. I'm a white woman with long blonde hair. I'm wearing my reading glasses, which also double as my music reading glasses for when I'm a cellist. I am working in my home space today in my family room, and I have lots of windows behind me, which bring me lots of lovely sunshine today. So I just want to acknowledge that the Etobicoke Philharmonic Orchestra operates on the traditional lands of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of Credit River. First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples have occupied this land for centuries and have enriched it with their knowledge. Matthew, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Judy. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. It's been a really successful undertaking for us. My name is Matthew Jones. I am privileged to be the music director of the Etobicoke Philharmonic. I'm a white male wearing reading glasses also. My wife tells me I'm a dirty blonde, not too gray yet. I have a squash sitting beside me here on my right, nervously next to the knife block. And my artwork up here, the Abdehalde painting, and I think you can just about see in the corner the people that are sitting in heaven with their feet dangling over the edge, keeping an eye on me.
Wonderful. So because every one of our member orchestras is structured slightly differently, has a different kind of season, when seasons are possible, I'd love just to get a description of the Etobicoke Philharmonic Orchestra in regular times, who your players are, where you're located, the number of concerts you do each season. Let's start with that. So pre-COVID, and then what's happened during COVID.
Okay. Well, I will do the pre-COVID section, and Matthew can do the COVID section. So we have a 61-year-old history. We have always rehearsed and performed concerts in Etobicoke, which used to be a separate city, but now is just the western region of Toronto. Our membership is made up of high school students all the way through to folks who are retired. It's a combination of trainees, amateur musicians, semi-professional musicians, and professional musicians. When we are at our fullest, we're about 65 members big. We try our best to pick repertoire that suits the needs of our audience as well as our range of players. We typically do 6 concerts a year. 4 of which would be part of our regular series. One would be a Christmas concert, which would double as our silent auction. And the other would be, it's had various names, but now it has the Discovery Series name. It's a bit more of an interactive approach, educational approach to the audience. And it could be pitched at specifically children or across the ages from young children all the way to senior citizens. So I think that gives you the highlights of what we're all about.
Okay, and if I may be so bold as to poke, what are your annual revenues approximately in the pre-COVID times?
So our budget's around 100,000 a year. 40% of that budget, if not even more, comes from OLG, Delta Bingo revenue. So we're extremely grateful to be able to have access to that revenue. We do get a small grant from the Toronto Arts Council, and then the rest comes from ticket revenue and donations from orchestra members, as well as community members and a few sort of corporate donations.
Great. Okay, that's really helpful, and I think that puts you dead center in the midst of a group of orchestras of similar size and similar revenue sources. The other thing I'll say about the Etobicoke Philharmonic is 20 years ago, I was a member of the EPO. And with that scary announcement, Matthew, over to you. EPO in COVID times.
Sure. Obviously, COVID struck and turned our world upside down, as it did for all of us on the call today. Our response was to, first of all, collapsed our season. We did not finish 2019, as many of us did not, and get into 2020. The following season, we decided, with the lack of a venue to really host an audience, or the health and safety precautions being such that it was not really possible, we went online with our presentations. We started out with small ensembles. We were able to grow slightly as we were allowed to rehearse in larger groups to produce larger orchestrations. And then that collapsed again, and we ended up doing the mosaic performance, of course. And now we are growing again, as I think is the case for many of us.
Okay. No, I think your conversation about growing and shrinking and growing and shrinking during COVID, best laid plans, et cetera, is something that's also very familiar to folks on the call.
No doubt.
Let's roll on more specifically to the Resilient Ontario Orchestras project. Many of the people on the call applied to participate in the program, and of course, part of it was we were asking you to say, what was the problem? What was the issue that you were trying to resolve in applying to the program?
So I think we had already started a strategic planning process prior to COVID. And through that process, so when we started that process, we thought naively that while it would take some time and patience, that it wouldn't be overly difficult, because we felt that we had a nice grounding from which to start from, and that it would just be a question of refreshing what we had already got going. As we sort of got into that process, we realized that we were actually running before we were walking, because there was some work that really needed to be done on our mission, vision, and core values. And we hadn't realized how kind of out of date they were and how they weren't really resonating. We sort of hadn't registered that when we started the process. And going through our strategic planning process, we realized that we needed to do considerable work. And it was actually, we sort of got a bit stuck. And so the grant happened at the perfect time, because it represented an opportunity for us to get some outside consultation to get us unstuck when it came to doing our mission, vision, and core values. And we realized that before we did anything more in terms of our strategic plan, finalizing it and developing an action plan, we really needed to have this piece done.
Matthew.
Yeah, it was an interesting time for me too, because for context, I had really only just started with the EPO. I'm in my fourth season. I've kind of lost track. But when I arrived, and as a new conductor, one of the first questions you have is, so what is it that you want me to do? And the EPO has been doing great things for 61 years, and that's fine. But it became apparent from the podium, standing in front of our wonderful musicians, a bit challenging to answer the question, so why are we doing what we're doing? And where are we going with this? And of course, a new conductor gets asked that. So I turned to our governance, and I did ask the board, can we do this process? The other interesting thing that maybe other orchestras have encountered is that some of the conflict around the many ideas and ambitions for the EPO were coming up around the programming table too. So when you're programming, you are obviously trying to satisfy those key questions about why it is we are doing this. So I was very, very happy when the organization took this step to revamp its strategic plan. It's true that while we were engaged in that strategic planning process, it became quite clear that of the various stakeholders, and even down to individuals within those silos, had differing ideas about why they were there and why they were participating in the EPO. So that vision and mission piece became a vacuum because there wasn't a singularity of thought there to even guide the details of the strategic plan.
Okay, but let me be a bit provocative here and go off script, because we have a moment or two. How complicated can this actually be? We have a group that's been serving Etobicoke and the area for 61 years. We know you've got rehearsals on, is it Wednesday nights? We know you're doing 4, 5, or 6 concerts a year. The repertoire probably runs from somewhere, let's say from Handel to, I don't know, Gary Kalesha, a proud resident of Etobicoke. Just sort of thinking about what gets done. Why, in your view, Is this a hard thing to do sometimes?
Well, from my experience, and I'm sure Judy has a different perspective as the president, but from my experience around that programming table, for example, if you've got a group of people that want to do a Shostakovich cycle, which is great, but it may not fit into your audience might not enjoy it so much, and some of your players might not enjoy it so much, and so it becomes one has to balance that with a vision of what it is that we're actually doing. And there was a real, at the time we did the strategic plan, a bias, in my view, towards the thinking of the musicians. Are we a club that gets together weekly on Wednesday nights to play great music together, and we don't care who comes to listen to it? Or are we trying to embed in the community? Are we trying to serve the greater collegialness of orchestras in our programming and in our activities? Those are two fairly divergent ideas that were present for us.
Right. And Judy, is there anything that you'd like to add? Because I have a follow-up question for both of you, but I'd love to hear your perspectives on why this might have been so challenging.
Well, I think everybody holds whatever views they have fairly strongly too. So, when people come to think about what it means to be as a musician, even in the orchestra, some people feel that this means that the organization is doing something for them. Other people think that they're doing something for the organization. Others think of it as more almost like a club, the way Matthew said, we're a bunch of colleagues who are getting together to create something. And are we doing it just so that we can play and the concerts are superfluous? Or is it that we're actually producing a product that we want an audience to engage with and enjoy? So we had all of these discussions, and because people were very strong in their emotions, we started to realize, hang on, we're getting this tussle of, well, this is how I see it. No, this is how I see it. So even though we've been around for so long, you just kind of keep doing what you've always been doing, and people come in and out of the organization and they bring different things to the organization, and possibly you lose a bit of focus. So in a way, Matthew becoming our music director 3 or 4-ish years ago, it gave us an opportunity to sort of kind of snap the elastic band and say, well, hang on, who are we? What are we doing? How do we want to work with this wonderful music director? How does he want to work with us? Like, where are we going?
That's so interesting. And one of the questions that I have sometimes found myself asking in certain situations is, who actually owns the orchestra?
Mm-hmm.
And the classic answer, of course, it's a not-for-profit organization. Nobody owns it, but the board takes responsibility for its health and well-being and longevity. And then there's these other people who are vital to the accomplishment of the mission. All of whom have perspectives and interests. But I do find in some settings, board members come and go, managers come and go. Quite often it's the musicians who have the strongest sense of ownership and participation. But let's face it, however wonderful those Wednesday night rehearsals are, there's not a lot of time available for a discussion about purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And what individual folks' motivation for being there might be, because my gosh, there's an awful lot of notes to master, to hone and to work on. Matthew, I saw your hand.
Yeah, I just, one of the most important questions one asks of an organization is, who is the membership? And as a conductor, they're the guys that actually can fire you, right? At the end of the day. And you too, Judy. And it's different depending on what your organization is. For the Etobicoke Philharmonic, it happens to be the musicians on the stage, which immediately creates a certain bias to this kind of governance visioning, right? But you have to be really careful with that, because obviously that's not where the story ends.
It's interesting, and I think there's one other thing that I'm going to throw out there, which is that when I think of Etobicoke, I think of a very long and relatively skinny, bounded on to the east, I believe, by the Humber River, to the west by Highway 427. And you're going from the lake shore up to Steeles Avenue. There are many neighborhoods in Etobicoke. There are many communities in Etobicoke. People have come to Etobicoke from all over the world. And it's also, I think, quite well known as an area where a lot of people who are living in Canada for the first time have opted to settle. So it is a culturally and linguistically diverse community, and it's also not super easy to travel around between parts of Etobicoke. So, and yet the EPO has been headquartered in particular neighborhoods of the former city for many years. So how much did the sense of place and of Etobicoke itself come into first your strategic planning explorations, the first round of work that you did, and then in your conversations with Sandy Lee and the work that you did with her on your mission, vision, and values?
So I think throughout all of our activities, we did decide that we wanted to, like, the Etobicoke part in our name was meaningful. We didn't want to drop it, and we wanted to keep it there having meaning, in the sense of we wanted to make sure that we were rehearsing and performing in Etobicoke. I mean, for the most part, that we would be established in Etobicoke. I mean, you were absolutely correct about the geography and the diversity that exists. And I look upon it as this gives us an enormous ability to do lots of creative partnerships and programming and linking. There's so much to choose from. It's fantastic. And, could we do better? 100%. But it, to me, it really, in our first strategic planning efforts, we did come back to, yes, we want to stay the Etobicoke Philharmonic Orchestra. And when we were working with Sandy, that further got confirmed that was an important aspect of who we were and where we wanted to be situated and how we wanted to conceptualize all of our activities, whether they be community outreach, audience development, programming, engagement of different musicians. And so that was fundamental. Matthew, I'll let you continue. I see your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to let the people on the call know, though, that the conversation did actually go to the extent of, should we change our name? Because of the identity crisis, if you want to call it that we were sort of engaged in. So of course we came back to, and I'm glad that we did, the Etobicoke as a central part of our identity. But I mean, this was amazing. This is where we found ourselves after 61 years. That's incredible, right?
Well, I think that the conversation about place has another complexity or richness in your situation, which is that you are in an area that has a lot of orchestras. The Toronto Symphony Orchestra and Tafel Music Baroque Orchestra are your neighbors, as is the Mississauga Symphony, as is the York Symphony Orchestra. We could go on in terms of who all is around you and what kind of call this would kind of emit to say, what are we doing that's distinctive? What are we doing that's particularly interesting? At least I imagine that came up because, among other things, I presume that you are competing for musicians.
Absolutely.
Sure.
In fact, I would say that is for all of us on the call, when push comes to shove, I think that's the number one area where, in fact, we do overlap very often. Yeah.
Right. So it might not be competition for audience. It might not be competition for dates at your chosen venue, but it would potentially be competition for the most qualified musicians, whether they are your paid professionals or your volunteers.
Yeah, you can add Ontario Arts Council or Toronto Arts Council to the list as well, right? So.
For sure. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the work that you did with Sandy. We knew going into this funded initiative that, I mean, I'll be quite candid here. The per project budget allocation was not exactly massive. We were essentially asking the consultants to do approximately 20 hours of work. And we were very stern in our contract with the consultants that when they did the 20 hours, and we paid them for those 20 hours at the agreed upon rate, that was all we could do. So it was definitely a very bounded project. I'm curious to know what Sandy did with you, what you did with Sandy in the time that you had together.
So we purposely wrote the proposal for this project, keeping in mind those strict boundaries, and we said, yes, we really think this work could be done in this amount of time, because not only did you want to make sure to fund a completed project, we wanted to have a completed project. So we wanted to set it up for success. So Sandy spent a little bit of time meeting with me. She met with the board to get a sense of who we were and really what we were all about. She spent a bit of time researching us loosely, researching us so that she could understand. We held several meetings. So actually, let me back up. She was very, very clear about what her process was. And part of her process was making sure that she got engagement and endorsement from us about her process, which was excellent, because part of why we had applied for this money was we wanted an external person to come in who had a solid process to help guide us. And so her process was structured, but tailored, and it was excellent for our purpose. So she took us through, she presented at a board meeting, and then we had a number of separate standalone meetings where we worked through mission, vision, core values. And then she had a final meeting where she came to the board to sort of play cleanup. And there was enough time in between all of these stages where we could, quote, sleep on it to see if the work that we had come up with was still resonating with us, or if we wanted to seek any kind of outside consultation. So throughout, she definitely had a framework that guided the conversations and guided the work that we were doing. And that was really important to us, because we knew we were all going to get an opportunity to have our voice. And she was very, very clear on what the word consensus means. It's not, consensus doesn't mean everybody around the table has the same opinion or that everyone agrees. It's consensus means, can you live with where this is going? Can you live with what, it may not be 100% what you want, but can you live with it? Does it resonate with you? Does it fit? When you sleep on it, do you still like it in the morning? Kind of idea. And so that was really useful process for us to go through, to have that. So that's kind of the overview, of what she did over the summer. Matthew, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I'd like to reveal just a little bit more about this to folks, because we tried to do this on our own when we appreciated the vacuum of these important statements, and we failed. We couldn't do it internally. Nobody around the board table was willing to give anybody else the agency to sort of lay the groundwork down for people to discuss within. So this is why this project came at an incredibly important time, because the alternative is we would still be bashing our heads together, not actually even agreeing on what a vision statement was or what a mission statement was, and how, right, to fill those buckets with our ideas. So the most critical thing was to bring somebody from the outside, give them the agency to talk to all of these very intelligent people that we enjoy on our board, and all respect greatly, but we did need this help specifically to collect the ideas in a safe place.
Yeah, and Sandy really worked to create that safe place. As I said, everyone had a voice. She made sure that everyone spoke. And then she had a definite process that she went through. I mean, we were agonizing at the level of words, as I'm sure anybody who's ever gone through any kind of mission, vision, well, core values often are words, but mission and vision is, it's not you want to get the message, yes, but it really comes down to, am I using this word or that word? You know, what is that? And so we had these discussions where she would type in a word and then we would edit the word and then we would go around the table and say, does this resonate? You know, but it was very collegial, right? She set the foundation to have this really collegial process of going through and having these thoughts about words. And, you know, as anyone who's done this knows, sometimes you can get 95, what you perceive as 95% through it and think you're done. And then someone can turn it around and say, well, hang on, what about this? And, you know, then it's sort of like, are you kidding? I thought we were almost done. But again, the way her process was, is it kind of allowed for people to put in these comments that felt a little bit like, oh, we were so close. But it was safe to say that, because then we went through and we had this discussion of, well, hang on, maybe this is a good thing to think about. What do we want to do with this? And we could work it through. So at the end of every meeting, you know, we had a good chunk of work that she then would send out to us that we could reflect on between that in the next meeting. And we were meeting, I don't know, every week or every 2 weeks or whatever over the summer to kind of get this work done. And I think it really was necessary to have that external person, because when we were trying to do it internally, as Matthew said, there was no obvious person who was given the agency. I mean, to a certain extent, me as president, you know, one could say, fine, I had a certain amount of authority, you know, to do that, but I didn't really want to be authoritarian, you know, in this kind of process. So it was really important for us to get that external person to help us navigate through and provide us with a framework.
Okay, I think this is exciting to hear. I've got a detail-y type question. Who's on your board? Was it your board that was essentially the planning group that was working on this, or was it a larger group, or you know, where was the voice of the broader group of musicians of your audience and so forth?
So for this particular activity, it was just the board, and that was a conscious decision, not to be exclusionary, but it was a conscious decision. As I indicated earlier, we had been already working on a strategic plan prior to COVID, and we had done audience consultation and orchestra member consultation as part of that. And we had surveys and focus group data, you know, with which to consult and sort of get a sense of where we were at. So we felt that for this body of 20 hours of work, you know, that we felt we could represent the view of all the stakeholders by just working with the board, and that we sensed that we would probably use up more than 20 hours potentially had we gone broader, and we really wanted to make sure to finish it. So our board members consist of orchestra members, some of whom are our paid principal players and some of whom are community members. Matthew is ex officio on the board. And then we have community members, some of whom have been with the orchestra for quite some time and others who have been new. So, and those community members don't necessarily have a music background. They just have a love for either being an audience member or for supporting community entities. So it was the board who was primarily working on this. But as I also indicated, there was time between the meetings, you know, for which to consult with different bodies if we felt we needed to go out and seek different feedback.
Right.
Matthew?
So in essence, the board that you have is the board that is the microcosm of the complete system, and that a significant body of work and research and intel had been gathered. So while you may have planned and then retreated to mission, vision, and values following thereafter, it informed the mission, vision, values work as well. Matthew, sorry.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. This is, I've never done it this way before, where you sort of do your strategic planning and then go back. But I mean, what essentially happened in that strategic planning process is we felt like we were getting our hands slapped a little bit, because we didn't feel any longer that we were speaking to all of the stakeholders of our organization. And so that when we got the strategic plan from that set of consultants, the mission and vision fell flat for us because it still did not reach the part of our organization that was feeling a bit unrequited. Yeah.
Okay. we've had a question come up in the chat that I'm actually going to reference right now, because I had talked a little bit earlier about my impression of Etobicoke as a really interesting and diverse place in which to place an orchestra that may or may not be having a fight about, the Shostakovich cycle. Just kind of throwing that one in there. How does diversity figure on your board, in your orchestra, in your broader community? And how does that come up in and we will look at, I promise you, the mission, vision and value statements in a moment or two, but just to put that word in there and say, how are you responding as an organization to diversity as an opportunity?
So that is a good question. I mean, historically, we've just existed and we've recruited board members. It's been a challenge, to be honest, because it's a volunteer position and it's a lot of rolling up your sleeves and getting into, it's an operational board more than a planning board. So it has been challenging to recruit board members. So we recruit from our audience, which again, if I'm being perfectly frank with you, our audience is not as diverse as Etobicoke is. And when we recruit our musicians, it's from training programs, it's from advertising in certain circles. And again, it is what it is. But, we have more diversity on the stage of musicians than we do on our board and in our audience. And do we see that this is a problem? Yeah, I think we can do better. It's not that we're unwelcoming to diversity. It's just the way it's fallen down. So far is the way it is. But I think, I think the term is not that we need to be. Well, I was at a talk actually last week where someone said it's not important to not be racist. It's important to be anti-racist. And I think the way we are in our culture now and stage of things is I would say that we were in the non-category before, but now we need to move into the anti-category, and we need to be more assertive in our efforts to try and make sure that the board is representative of our community, our audience is representative of our community and our musicians within the scope that exists. Because obviously to be a musician, you have to play at a certain level, and we have blind auditions in terms of doing that. But for board members, I think we can work on a little bit of diversity. But I'm just going to be really honest. It's really hard to get people who want to volunteer to do this much work, for a community organization. It's not easy.
I can imagine that there's a resonance in what you said with many, many people who are listening. Matthew.
Yeah, so in the middle of all of this story that we're telling, the Etobicoke Philharmonic was invited to a meeting with the Toronto Arts Council. And I came out of that meeting feeling, really kind of bummed that the Toronto Arts Council was not seeing all of the effort that we were trying to make to represent our community and to be diverse. And actually this meeting very much influenced the conversation at our next visioning get together with the board of directors. And we learned very quickly that, yeah, we need to put those values right at the front so that everybody can see them. I mean, I think that we are engaged, of course, in making our community more diverse and more equitable, and we want to be seen to be doing that. And so when we see the vision and the mission, I think all of the people on the call will appreciate that value and that sentiment has been elevated to the top of our thought. And it's already having effect within the organization, because now there's a very powerful lens that we are casting all of our decisions through, and at least asking the question, right? Are we showcasing our value of equity and diversity for our community?
So I want now to actually, go into the big reveal, if I may, and we're probably going to discover that my homework on the Etobicoke Philharmonic Orchestra website was incomplete, and that I got things in the wrong order or something along those lines. But let me now endeavor to fumblingly share my screen again, and I'd like you folks to present to us, presuming I got this right. A brief moment for station, sort of.
Well, just one quick comment. I'm sort of been looking at the chat as it's going by. I think one of the things that meeting with TAC did for us is it made us realize that we'd actually been doing a little bit better than we had described in what we had given TAC to work on. And so, as Matthew said about the lens to put it through, we realized when we put that lens, in front of our eyes to look at what we'd submitted to them, we actually hadn't done as good a job as we should have and could have to highlight what we were already doing, so that the impression we were creating with TAC wasn't 100% accurate. And so I think that's part of it too, is to make sure that we're representing ourselves.
Okay, so with that inspiring conversation with the Toronto Arts Council in the bag, I believe that I'm now sharing what I understand to be the mission statement of the Etobicoke Philharmonic. And let me just say to Judy or Matthew, who wants to read it out loud?
Well, I'll do mission. And then Matthew can do. So we offer Etobians, and I know that that's a handful, but that is the official term I've been told. We offer Etobians affordable local access to imaginative performances, mentorships, education, and outreach initiatives that unite and inspire. And so we really did agonize over all of these words, because all of these words were meaningful to us in different ways. Because it's not just the performance, but it's mentorship, it's education, it's outreach, it's all of that.
And may I also underline the emphasis on imagination?
Yes.
Is wonderfully liberating. Okay.
I will jump in just quickly because there is a second sentence. I don't know if there's a second slide, but the second sentence is the EPO is committed in all that we do to the principles of equity, diversity, and inclusion, and providing an accessible, safe, and respectful environment.
Yes.
Well, I stopped the share because that showed up someplace else, and I was unable to get my my slides to behave.
Well, that's okay. Note to self, if it wasn't obvious to you what our mission, vision, and core values are, then note to self, we should improve how it's presented on our website, so it's a little bit more transparent. So that's been duly noted. It's all good.
Okay. Well, I'm going to do the bad thing now, and I'm not going to wrestle further with this. I'm going to read the vision statement as I understood it to be. Our vision going forward is to engage and inspire our diverse community through the performance and exploration of symphonic music. Did I get it right for the, and Lauren has very kindly pointed out that the mission, vision, and values, at least as I understood them from your website, are contained on the slideshow that I'm chickening out and not showing to you. And again, with what I just read about the vision, it's the performance and exploration that struck me as being particularly neatly stated. Matthew, are you going to do the values?
I certainly can if you want. Absolutely.
I really do.
So the Etobicoke Philharmonic Orchestra's core values that came out of these discussions is: number one, to embrace diversity; number two, providing a joyful experience and quality performance; number three, ensuring relevance; number four, nurturing a welcoming, honest, respectful atmosphere; number five, awakening a deeper love of symphonic music; and number six, offering Etobians affordable local access to symphonic music.
I don't know about anybody else on the call, but I think I want to go to the reactions thing, and I think I want to put up the celebration thing, followed by some clapping, followed by some hearts, and just sort of general explosions, because that's really pretty darn spectacular. I think anyone who's done any one of these processes before would acknowledge what it means to put one word beside another and what kind of transformative impact the simple order of words and the choice of words can have on putting something forward to the world. One question that I want to pose to the two of you before we roll on to see if we've got some questions in the chat, which Lauren will summarize for us. Were there any surprises for you in the process?
I think for me, it was interesting the words when we started to, so part of what Sandy had us do was she gave us homework where we all came up with a mission statement or a vision statement or core values before each meeting. And then she went around and we shared. And it was really enlightening to look at our points of commonality, but there were times where somebody came up with an idea that I hadn't thought of, and I thought, wow, that's fantastic. That resonates so much more with me than what I came up with. Like that word matters so much more than the word I came up with. And so I think during the process, the way we were going around is the surprises were that there were words that came out at the end that were important, that they were always there, but I wouldn't have picked them at the start as being those words that really resonated the most with us. And I think that was what was really exciting actually about the process. The meetings flew by, to be honest, they flew by, and it was really energizing and inspiring to come out of it because we opened ourselves up to, oh, that's something I hadn't thought of, but that resonates more with what I had thought.
Matthew, any surprises for you?
Well, I'm torn between two surprises. One of them is very simple, so I'll start with that one, and it's relatively short. It's wonderful to watch a professional like Sandy Lee come into a room of intelligent people and be given the agency to do something and actually to have it happen. It was actually a very simple and a very comfortable process, having met with challenges trying to do it ourselves internally. So I thought that was great. I don't know if it surprised me, but it was delightful. The surprise, I think, is we have to remember that COVID-19 struck in the middle of all of this as well. And asking our orchestra, as I described our COVID-19 programming earlier in the broadcast here, to record and to put things out on the internet for all to see, changed the malleability of people's willingness, I guess, to discuss what is it we're doing. Because I think when you press that recording button as a musician, things change, right? And I mean, the Toronto Symphony is recording. We have the Berlin Philharmonic, digital concert hall. What are we doing? Why are we doing this? And it has shaped the vision and mission. The stepping back from, excellence of artistic product and looking at why are we doing what we're doing in the community. And it has influenced and will now influence the future of the EPO as we turn to more embedding ourselves in the community, sharing our passion, and preparing people to appreciate the Toronto Symphony and maybe the Berlin Philharmonic better,
Which has to do with the distinctiveness of the role that you play. Now, I'm just going to turn it over to Lauren. We have exactly 1 minute before 1 o'clock. Lauren, anything in the chat that we should highlight at this point?
So there aren't any specific questions now that we've already addressed Devin's question. There's some notes about the Scarborough Philharmonic has had a special meeting with a guest from Ted Rogers School of Business Diversity Institute. So there's some information on that in the chat. Lots of really interesting comments about mission and vision and values. We can provide a transcript of the chat afterward if you'd like to look at those as well. But yeah, last chance to type your questions, but I will just remind everyone that we have a lot more sessions coming up for the Festival of Learning. This was a wonderful session. Thank you so much, Matthew and Judy and the EPO and Sandy for sharing with us. We really appreciate it, but we have more coming up. So next week we have a session on planning your marketing communications playbook. That'll be with Ottawa Chamber Orchestra and Nicole Fowler. And I'll paste some information in the chat for how to join and register. We also have a feedback survey that we'd love to hear what you thought of the session, what was helpful for you and what we could do better. And thank you so much, everybody. And any last words from Matthew, Judy, Katherine? I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you for offering this grant, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to do this work. It was timely and such a positive experience. So thank you so much.
And I want to wish everybody the best of luck in their, pandemic recovery. I know it's tough. It's going to continue to be a bit difficult, but fight the good fight, my friends.
And I just want to congratulate you on behalf of everyone in the room for your candor, your willingness to share, your courage, your powers of articulation. All the hearts are flowing in right now towards the EPO, towards you, Judy, and towards you, Matthew. And thank you for your leadership and for your willingness to share. And thanks to the Ontario Trillium Foundation for just giving us an excuse to talk to you and to be continued. Thanks, everyone.
Wonderful. Take care.
Thanks all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.